In the Lab, a Texans podcast that takes a different look at things. Drew Dougherty and John Harris have their lab coats and goggles on, and the Bunsen burners burning. Here's Drew.
In the lab time, from our bedrooms or from our houses, I don't know where you are exactly in your bedroom, but you've got that sweet seafoam kind of light blue background. I like it, John. You're looking good, buddy. How are you?
You know, it's funny that you bring that up because this is actually my office downstairs, and where you and I did the draft special, that's actually in the room right above me. And my wife painted that kind of a darker color than this. But the reason that she did that was because my daughter has a bunch of auditions. They do self-tape auditions, and they use that as kind of as their green screen. So that kind of is their green screen. So they film up against that wall while when we're not in there for anything like this. And so my wife is actually up there right now doing a Zoom call. So we called that the Zoom room. And so it's just a little darker than this, but it's funny you bring it up because I hadn't thought about it. It's like, oh my gosh, yeah. Because this is down in my office. You can see that's my senior year football team. That's me right there. And
is that
there's
Brown
Bill
or
O'Brien. That's Bill O'Brien,
okay.
like right behind me right there, which I'm sure you all can see on this, on this podcast.
I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could talk about many things, but we got to stay with mainly the draft. But I do want to kind of also touch on Tunsil extending, and then touch on the news that we've seen about Gibson being let go. But let's start with the draft. This one, for me, I think is going to come down to these first two picks because the last we saw of the Texans on the field, they were in the midst of a 51-7 run in which they were getting smoked by the Chiefs, and they weren't able to get after Patrick Mahomes. Ostensibly, adding these two guys helps you try to combat that problem of getting after the quarterback. Now, I know Blacklock's not a pass rusher, but he can do things and mess with guys there in the interior of the offensive line when he's doing his job. And if he's doing that, he's making things tougher and making things tougher on the other offensive linemen out on the edges, which is opening things up, I think, possibly for J.J. Watt, for Whitney Merciless, for Jacob Martin, for Brennan. So whoever's out there rushing, Jonathan Granard. So I really, really, really like these first two picks, John.
Yeah, the only thing that I would quibble with, Drew, in some sense, is the fact that I do think Ross Blacklock can be a good pass rusher. I think he already –
I wasn't saying he wasn't. I wasn't saying he wasn't, but I'm saying that's not his, primary –
No, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's not known for that. But when you see his quickness and you see his power and leverage and the things that he's able to do on the field, you're like, wow. Now, this is the way that let's present, Drew, the 2020 draft class for the Houston Texans, and let's do it the right way. First rounder, Laramie Tunsil. Second rounder, Ross Blacklock. Second rounder, Brandon Cooks. Third rounder, Garyon Conley. Third rounder, John Granard. Third round comp pick, Duke Johnson. Fourth rounders, Charlie Heck and John Reed. Fifth rounder, Isaiah Coulter. Now, how does your draft sound?
And sixth rounder, Keon Crossan. Don't forget to throw him in.
Yes, Keon Crossan, sixth rounder. Now, when I did that exercise, I, A, forgot Keon Crossan in the sixth round, and B, I forgot to put Brandon Cooks in there. But I outlaid all of that without, Brandon Cooks. And even looking at it without Brandon Cooks, you go, okay. Because no team in the league signed their first-round pick on Friday to a 3-year extension on top of the one final year, his option year. No team did that. The only team that had a first-rounder that was already signed and on their team was the LA Rams, and that's with Jalen Ramsey. And they still don't have an extension, so they only have him for this final year. So from that perspective, when you think about it the way that I laid it out, it changes the way, to me, that I look at the draft. It changes the way that everybody should look at what the Texans were able to do because you were able to take the 2020 draft and leverage that into the 2019 season and then leverage it beyond the 2020 season, of course. So from that perspective, I think it was a whale of a draft. From the picks that they actually made that played college football in 2019, I loved Blacklock. I had him at 21 in my Harris 100. I love that up the field penetration ability that he has. Just he's a house of fire. And I've told a story a few times. In 2017, when I was studying TCU, and I always and you know this, I sit, in my office, and whenever I'm watching games, I have a notebook, and I will always write down, players that I need to watch. Maybe not for that NFL draft, but for future ones. And so I'm watching TCU, and I'm like, gosh, dang, number 90 is wrecking shop. Who is this? And so I look it up, and it's Ross Blacklock, sophomore. And I went, okay, got to wait for this guy. So made a mental note going into the 2018 season, and just gut punch, like, 2018. Because I felt like, sort of found this guy. Like, I got my eye on this guy. I've been talking about him for a little bit. Okay, he's one of my finds. And then he gets hurt in 2018, comes back in 2019. I'm kind of curious to see what he has. Same guy I saw in 2017. So I was stoked to see him get to the Texans. Granard was a guy that there's something about him. Like, he's not the most gifted athlete in the world, but he has a ton of athletic football gifts, if that makes sense. He understands how to rush the quarterback. I actually, I think it was about 3 or 4 days before, I've gotten to where I don't watch much TV. I've kind of adopted a style like my daughter. My daughter just goes on YouTube, and she just watches a bunch of stuff on YouTube. I've kind of gotten to that realm on YouTube. I watch cooking shows on YouTube. There's so much stuff there. And so I happened to stumble on something with John Granard, and I think it was the SEC Network, and he had about a 4 or 5 minute television segment where he was talking about pass rushing. And he was talking about reading the tackle's steps and reading his leverage and knowing when to go inside and where he needed to put his hand and what he did. And I was like, boy, that's a really advanced thought process for a guy of his age. And I just remember thinking, man, he understands the art of an inexact science and can apply it. I was like, this guy's going to go somewhere and do something. I kind of wish it's with us, but you throw him in there with Whitney has the same kind of philosophy. Whitney, the understanding in the toolbox of pass rush moves that he has. Now you put a guy like Granard in there, and you're right, Drew. I think when you look at this draft, the last time anybody saw us play was in that playoff game. National people saw us play in that playoff game. And what they saw in that playoff game was a team that could get to the quarterback. Patrick Mahomes having all day to throw the ball.
Yeah.
Okay, now you've added 2 guys at different spots on the defensive line that can go impact Patrick Mahomes at all throwing the football. So I felt really good about those 2. Not that I didn't about the others, but I think your draft essentially is going to be graded, if you will, by what you do early in the draft, especially rounds 1, 2, and 3. And I feel like with Blacklock and Granard, those guys are going to be able to do what the Texans want, and that is go get the quarterback.
Yeah, and I think it was either Thursday or Friday during the day, the Texans finalized their deal and extended Laremy Tunsil. So that had been a bit of a question mark. O'Brien had said back in February, look, we want to get the deals done with Tunsil and Watson sooner rather than later, but you didn't know how long it was going to go on. It could have moved into next year. Yeah. Get one domino to fall. Maybe the next one falls soon, but Tunsil comes back. Tunsil is back through 2023. He met with the media yesterday, and the 2 things that stood out to me were this. A, he's been working out with Watson, he said, 4 times a week, and he said they talk every single day. Those guys were at the Pro Bowl together in Orlando. He's the protector of the blind sides, quote unquote. I can't wait to see what this brings. And he said they're very excited. He said it hurt seeing DeAndre Hopkins go. I think he kind of speaks for many people in the organization. So he was very upfront about that. Now, the second thing that I really loved hearing was I 100% can get better, because somebody had asked him, hey, Bill O'Brien thinks your best football is ahead of you. And he said, I agree. So he brought up, getting to town 8 days before the season opener, and he thinks he's going to be better than he was last year. And judging by what you and I have talked about many, many times, tackles have a progression. Year 3, year 4, year 5 is when you really start to see the great ones sort of blossom, take bloom, take ownership. And he's right in that window there.
Yeah, you said it, Drew. I think he's getting to that window. He's still young. I mean, he got into the league, at 20. I think he was 20 when he got into the league. So, Austin Jackson is a guy that was 20. I think Wills was 20, or Andrew Thomas was 20. Those guys have an opportunity. But when I watched those guys, I didn't see Laremy Tunsil. I mean, I didn't see that. So you're talking about a left tackle at the height of his powers, if you will, and still going to be in that. I mean, these next 4 years, I mean, that's the sweet spot. That's the prime time of a guy's career, especially a guy like Laremy Tunsil. So it's funny you said that about the conversations that he's had with Deshaun, the working out with Deshaun, because that's the first thing that stood out to me when he said it. I was like, oh yeah, okay, good. Like that, there was something about hearing that really made me feel like those two, because when you think about the iterations of this team over the years, you know, there were times where the heart and soul of the team was, you know, Brian Cushing and D'Amico Ryans, and then it kind of transferred over the years. You know, it became, you know, Jonathan Joseph and Kareem Jackson were those guys, and now we're getting to a point where the heart and soul of this team, Deshaun Watson and Laremy Tunsil, those are the two guys. And obviously, I don't want to forget about J.J. Watt, but I think when we think about the iterations, it's those two guys with Watt. You know, Witt's been around for a while. You know, the core of this team is now obviously changed, especially on the offensive side of the ball. It's going to be those two. This offense will go as those two are going to take it. But the other thing that stood out to me, and this really didn't, it wasn't, the other thing on the call that stood out to me was just Laremy was, I love Laremy. I mean, he's just an interesting guy. He's always, I followed him for a long time. His coach, when he was a sophomore in high school, was a guy named Craig Howard, was a guy that I knew from just my days of coaching in Jacksonville. And so I followed Laremy for a long time. And I just remember the first time I ever saw him, like, that kid's a sophomore. Holy smokes. He's turned into exactly, you know, what the highest level of what you ever thought he was going to be. But I liked just how gregarious he was, how open he was. Talked about negotiating the contract on his own. Now, he had some help from some lawyers and stuff, but he did it on his own. And I can't even imagine how difficult that part of it was. But the fact that he was literally directly negotiating with Bill, I thought was kind of interesting. The one thing that struck me that wasn't really spoken about that I remember, but it just hit me as we were listening to Laremy. It was like, okay, Laremy signed through 2023. Max has 3 more years left on his rookie deal. Nick just signed a 3-year extension. Zach, you still have, contractually, I think he's got 1 more year. I think that's what's left. But either way, and then you got Titus, who's on his rookie deal. And if you exercise a 5th-year option, you'll have him for the next 4 years. You're going to have this offensive line, at least 80% of it, together for the next 3 years at a minimum.
Yeah.
And that, considering where we were in 2017 and where we are heading into 2020, we couldn't be, as Chandler would say on Friends, we couldn't be more different. And that ends up being a good thing. And so these next 3 years with Deshaun at the helm behind this offensive line, we should be able to do some good things going forward, hopefully.
Yeah, it's guys that are all hitting their primes. I mean, it's all, they're hitting their primes together. So that's the beauty of this. It's going to be fun to see. And now you've got all these weapons that you've kind of layered in. So I'm pretty pumped about that. All right, let's wrap things up. Sounds like Deshaun Gibson, based on reports, no longer a Texan. So things get interesting there at the safety spot, because you've got Justin Reed, you've got Jalen Watkins, you got Eric Murray. Don't know who's going to play, but there's also some guys that are still out there, so to speak, that might be able to come in and play this position.
Well, there's one in particular, and I know Justin Reed has probably been texting Bill O'Brien on the hour, every hour, and that's his brother Eric Reed, who we saw in week 4, and he was very good. He was excellent in that game, and I think Eric has still got some football left in him. There's no question about that. So yeah, there's an option there, and Michael Thomas was signed. Nimitz High School, went to Stanford.
Yep.
And the veteran's been around a little bit, played a lot of special teams, and he'll definitely play a lot of special teams for us. But, he's an option as well. And I've been saying this on Into Labs for however long. I think Lonnie Johnson's a guy that they could honestly, given the cornerback situation, getting Roby back, having Conley, getting Vernon back, re-signing Phillip Gaines, drafting John Reed, I think there's an opportunity that maybe Lonnie Johnson moves to safety, and that's a position that they maybe it's a position with Lonnie that they kind of throw everything in there together. He's kind of the nickel, the star, the sub linebacker, the safety. He's kind of a jack of all trades kind of guy. Maybe that's what they do with him. But Anthony Weaver's got a chess piece with Lonnie Johnson, just trying to figure out where does he fit. So I do think there are some options. But the one thing about safeties, Drew, it's interesting because I remember the very first article I ever wrote for College Football News, which started my whole media career really, way back when. I wrote about the University of Texas, and it was 2003. They were getting ready to play Kansas State. And I remember saying that University of Texas was flawed in the secondary because they had basically 4 corners. And I was like, they needed somebody at safety to be able to just be the enforcer, the hitter, that established some grit in that secondary. And at the time, that's really what was needed. That's the way the game was played. You had 2 hammers at safety, you had 2 cover guys at corner. That's the way you played the game. They were sort of ahead of the game because now I think it's gone the other way. I do think you have to have speed, 4 guys back there that know how to cover. Justin Reed has cornerback experience. Jalen Watkins has cornerback experience. Eric Murray definitely has cornerback experience. Michael Thomas, I think, played corner, if I remember, in college. So those guys all have cornerback coverage ability and experience. You're not just bringing a guy that was solely a safety.
And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like what the University of Miami was doing back in the 80s. They were making linebackers, defensive linemen. They were making safeties, linebackers, corners. It's a lot like that. We see this cycle through sometimes. But, yeah, that's one of the things that kind of has come to fruition.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's the way it's being played now. And I think about that game, against the Chiefs, and obviously it was Kelsey that was really, sort of hurting us. He did hurt us. And, Lonnie got banged up in that first quarter. But I think having the wherewithal to throw different guys at a guy like Kelsey, like, okay, who's covering me now? Is this a corner? Is this a safety? Okay, if it's a safety, just presenting a lot of different options to him as to what he can do. And then if you're rushing the quarterback with a little bit better success, then covering Kelsey is going to be a little bit easier because now Kelsey doesn't get really honestly to be creative. And think of the 10 catches he had against us. I think probably 4 or 5 of them were routes that he actually was covered and then made, some sort of move to get to an open spot once Patrick started scrambling. So I do think there are some things that in that game, when you look back, you're like, we did push Patrick off the spot a little bit, but then we just didn't stick in coverage like we needed to as well. So, and then when we did stick in coverage, then Pat had too much time to throw the football. So it's kind of, part and parcel, as Bill O'Brien always says, rush and coverage, you got to work together. And those two were doing, they were kind of high-low in it, really. They didn't meet in the middle. And hopefully with the additions that the Texans have made, they'll start to meet in the middle and start to be a defense that can stop teams like the Chiefs, like the Ravens, and the top teams in the league.
John Harris, always good talking with you. We're gonna get weird next week on In the Lab. So that's all I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna tease you.
I like weird. I like weird, bro. I'm cool with that.
We had to be conventional this week because of what just happened. But good talking with you as always. We'll do it again very, very soon. This has been In the Lab. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to know when we post new content.